Extras. When it came time for them to repair the tram, and by them, I mean Draven, we could have just hand-waved it. But that's lame for such a rare and unusual task. It's something very few people in the world could do. So we did make a bunch of skill checks, which Draven is incredibly well tuned to do, but I also presented him with some choices, whether or not to fix the air conditioner, and the 3 communication systems, not counting the aura signature needed for the force gates. He decided to spend the day on each to fix all 3 of those, even though their exact purposes were not obvious. The first of them ran the linear display. The second was the communicator which allowed them to hear Polaron controller once they got in range, basically the tunnel under the Arctic continent. But the third was the remote shutdown that the controller used to turn off their tram, which turned out not to be a bad thing since the hallway was blocked by the hardened lava, which didn't seem to show up on the display, meaning that when they saw it out the window at high speed, somebody would have had to make a check or saving throw to stop the tram in time. It's easy to forget what a truly epic feat of construction this whole ancient transport system represents, though. The carriage itself, though limited to the tunnels and rails, is a pretty impressive vehicle for a fantasy setting, capable of traveling faster than a horse's top sprinting speed, but sustaining it for hours. Then there's digging this massive, well-engineered and reinforced tunnel for thousands of miles under a desert and even under the sea, with at least 2 shielded stations. Plus, TR4 was hinting there used to be some kind of Ataran structure in the mountains near his northern terminus. And even then, they don't know how far south it goes. One presumes at least to the southern edge of Uruk, not far from Corso's Chasm, but who knows? While the repairs were in progress, Black, Little One, and the others helped with any heavy lifting, poked around the station, sparred with Liz to learn that she wasn't quite on their level, but was still an extremely skilled and powerful combatant by normal standards. But Little One also spent some time setting up a forge. Not a creation forge, like the long-lost facilities that produced the Warforged, but a regular blacksmithing forge. And he used his knowledge of smithing and metallurgy to analyze some of the etronium, the blue metal, to find out its properties. There's plenty of scrap lying around, even without deconstructing any of the metal wall plates. He wanted to know if etronium was another supermetal, like mithril or adamantite, but he found it was very similar to steel. It had noticeably higher tensile strength, allowing it to make those long, unsupported bridges they'd seen at Ginneron, but its other properties balanced that out more or less, such that pure etronium armor or weapons would have the same stats as steel ones. Obviously, the Atarans used it to form different alloys for constructing warforged golems and such, but this confirmed some of the bits and pieces they'd read in the old books, which suggested Atarans viewed this material, spawned by the creation matrix, as a ubiquitous, almost junk metal or filler. They got very worried about those force fields, especially after hearing from the not-so-receptive Polaron controller. I did find it hard not to laugh, though, when Draven said, "We could warn it that the previous facility was compromised. Maybe that would help it trust us, but I'm worried that's the opposite, and it would want to lock everything down. I'm worried there's no good answer. Because my GM notes literally say, there's probably no good answer. I left it open. I didn't know if they would come up with some genius way to get the benefit of the doubt, but it'd be pretty hard, for reasons. The one thing I could think of would be if they used magic and a ridiculous bluff checks, or just more magic, to pretend to be a long-lost Ataran. If they did a good job, they probably could have gotten the benefit of the doubt, though they would probably pay for it later because eventually the controller would find out. But it might have helped them get in initially. Now, as much as they were worried, it would be pretty BS for me to cripple them in a tram versus force field crash, unless they really did something to deserve it. But they had a cool idea, once they got worried about the controller, to fill the tram with solid fog spell. The spell stops projectiles dead and reduces movement to 5 feet per round. It's pretty powerful. I thought that was an awesome idea and was totally going to allow it, which would have helped if they had the remote shut-off disabled and had to make a reflex save to slow down or stop before hitting the lava rock obstruction. But Draven looked it up just to make sure, and apparently falling into solid fog only reduces falling damage by 1d6 per 10 feet of fog passed through, which means a passenger at the back of the vehicle would have the impact of a crash reduced by at most 2d6 damage. not great for a high-velocity impact. I can confirm that the big eye seen with the Dark Ancients in foreshadowing, promo, and post-credits scenes was Gamma. When I went to actually draw him, I found I had to change the design of his huge dark green face holes to look right with his Warforged body, and the one I'd made for use on a black background just didn't work for me. I tried. The Dark Ancients really did consider Gamma an anomaly. The first Dark Ancient emerged, transcended as they say, on its own. But those since then, Beta, Delta, etc. No wait, there isn't one called etc. Anyway, it's hard to say if those who followed were helped directly by the original, but they certainly had that example to strive for. Seeing that this transformation was possible may have been enough for highly intelligent and amoral warforged with magical or psionic gifts to find their own way to transcend. Gamma, though, clearly did not share that inquisitive intellect. In fact, seems to have been non-verbal, though that may not itself be any indication of intelligence level, since it clearly could understand spoken language. It's hard to tell what kind of magic it possessed in its original body, but similar to the way evolutionary biologists tell us that eyes and other features have evolved independently multiple times in nature, Gamma's version of parasitic immortality appears to have evolved independently of the version used by the other Dark Ancients. In game terms, Gamma had some similarities, but didn't actually have the Dark Ancient template. He had his own version as a Dark Agglomeration. It still adds to its lifespan in the exact same way, gaining life more efficiently from Warforged than from true constructs. But since it just adds more bodies to its own, it doesn't have the true hit point stat, where Dark Ancients normally only take 1/4 damage to their true HP because of their detachment from the corporeal world. Gamma, whose consciousness is spread thinly throughout so much mass, and just has ×4 hit points. Because of his construction and his grossly inflated HP total, I did not feel it should qualify for my gargantuan creature damage reduction. That's why it only has the DR of an ordinary adamantine-bodied Warforged, and, as explained in the video, it was not immune to critical hits and sneak attack. I appreciate that, as of yet, nobody bothered complaining that I described his mass as being mostly blue yttronium. That's his real description, but in my art, and particularly contrasted against the polar landscape, I felt that the first finger poking up out of the ice should be gray, possibly from exposure, and the rest of him just seemed to look better with the uniform gray Warforged subbodies. If you're wondering what exactly was going on when it tossed out the adds, additional Warforged enemies, Gamma's consciousness was still tied to them by invisible tethers, temporarily animating him with a pretty low level of functionality, and the fact that they are tethered, like puppets, meant they had to stay reasonably close to the rest of its body. As a boss encounter, Gamma had its own set of rules. Basically, it only had a speed of 10, but gets 2 standard actions per round instead of the normal, like 1 full round action. If it needs to move faster, it can spend one of those actions crawling another 20 feet, which is slow, but otherwise he chooses from the following set of actions. Smash, plus 25 to hit, 4d6 plus 10 damage, and smash a 15 by 15 foot square of ice around the target into difficult terrain. Any square which was already difficult terrain instead collapses. If there is an adjacent intact square, a creature in a collapsed square can make a reflex save, DC 15 to get to an intact square, DC 18 if they're trying to hold on to an already smashed square. If there is no safe square to get to, or if you fail the save, you fall 40 feet into the dark space below, taking 4d6 falling damage and 2d6 cold damage from the frigid water. Obviously, if you were porting him to a different environment, you probably wouldn't have the break the ice subgame for you, but you could still smash, like, non-super hard terrain into difficult terrain, because why not? It's cool. Eject puppets. Gamma tosses out 5 Warforged within 30 feet. Each has 8 hit points, AC 18, with DR 2/adamantine, and can make a touch attack at +9, dealing 2d6 negative energy damage, and giving Gamma temp HP for half that amount. The temp HP stack from multiple Warforged in the same round, but only if the total temporary hit points generated in that round exceeds his current total. The temp HP lasts up to 1 minute. Now you notice they weren't technically minions. I don't know why. They certainly could have been. It, in practice, is more or less irrelevant. Rainbow Dash does more than enough damage to obliterate them with her trample. Ranged Grapple. Toss out 5 Warforged up to 100 feet. Each makes a touch attack at +9, and if successful, make a single grapple check at +9 with +5 on the grapple check for each additional body that latched on. However, a flying medium creature is too small for more than 3, 2 on a small creature or 1 on tiny, to cling to him in the air, so in that case any extras would fall off after the initial check. A creature on the ground can be dogpiled by all 5 regardless. Technically, if Draven's flying up at altitude, the falling damage would probably kill any that didn't latch on. Finger Lasers. Range 400, damage halved if past 200 feet. +13 ranged attack, 86 negative energy damage. You notice that I was well aware of his lack of general mobility, so he had to have ways to engage at range if the enemies tried to range hose him, which is less likely with our party, but you never know. In hindsight, I probably should have given Gamma a 3rd action per round to combat the oversized party, given all the NPCs they have, though thematically I liked the 2 hands, 2 actions paradigm. With only 2 actions, I didn't even get around to throwing puppets at Draven, because I wanted to make sure to drop somebody through the ice. Plus, the melee guys were doing a ton of damage that needed to be dealt with. Near the end, I had to choose something cool to do to Draven before Gamma died, and the lasers were more straightforward. With the puppets, they were stopped as soon as its consciousness died. Gamma also had that Whale of Many power, to put a clock on the fight and add pressure, because as soon as you fail to save once, sure, you're deaf, which rarely matters in D&D, but taking 2d6 damage per round until Gamma dies, or until you run out of the 250-foot range, would really add stress. I didn't emphasize that very much in the video, because when actually running the fight, they were complaining about it dealing damage via sound, then continuing to do damage when you're deaf, and more importantly, it was early in the fight, and I was concerned it would be too hard with that 2d6 per round wearing away the squishy NPCs. But really, I should have just trusted my design plan, because this party can take it. They can make their own decisions about healing versus fighting, and I really should have stuck to it, because they dealt the 490 damage, plus a little extra from the temp HP, really fast. And it's sonic damage. It doesn't matter if your ears are currently working, or if they're ringing terribly, or whatever. In the case of this particular attack, it's probably causing damage to your poor vulnerable ear structures, which isn't going to be better after you've already been deafened. If you're wondering about the effect of silence, there's a choice when you cast that. You can target an object, a friendly or enemy creature. On an object or a willing target, there's no save, which is why Angel cast it on herself. If you cast it on the enemy, you have the advantage that they're stuck with it. There's no way they can move away from it. But they do get a saving throw, and if they succeed, you get no silence at all. In this case, if she'd hit Gamma directly and it failed its save, then I would have ruled it would stop the whale, even though the radius is normally smaller. But Angel was trying to guess how it would work in this unusual circumstance. She chose the normally safe version with no save. A good bet against a target that doesn't appear to move very fast. And I made a ruling. The spell we call Divine Transformation is actually Holy Transformation, lesser, from the Spell Compendium. It's a level 4 cleric spell, lasts 1 round per level, changes your creature type to Good Outsider, with a +2 sacred bonus to Strength, Constitution, and to saving throws, plus Dark Vision 60 feet, and Fly Speed 60. One of my patrons, the Playwright, asked, I'd like to know how Gamma collects his bodies. Does he take them from the other Dark Ancients when they're done with them? Does he excavate ancient Tartan buildings to find caches of dead Warforged? Some other way? Gamma definitely doesn't use discarded bodies left by the others. I suppose many of them have some life left, but other than in battle, Dark Ancients normally keep bodies till they are close to wearing out, because they survive not by draining life force so much as just by living in a body. Of course, The incompatibility burns out true construct bodies much faster than it does Warforged. For this reason, the few scholars who are even aware of the Dark Ancients suspect some connection between the Dark Ones and the caches of Warforged that have been found preserved, like in suspended animation. Gamma is clearly somewhat different, though. It does seem to have some kind of a life drain component. Gamma adds bodies to join their life force with its own in order to extend its own life. But if you think about it, all that had to start with one. When it took over another body, moving its mind over but still joined to its old aging husk, was this before or after the last Ataran died? Either way, hauling around another, apparently dead body would be pretty hard to explain. But somehow it transitioned from that, and as it spread part of its consciousness across to these secondary bodies, Gamma learned to control them like puppets, at least for short periods of time. Imagine one Warforged who seems a little off, with a bunch of others idling around nearby, looking passive, then all standing in unison, forming up like a gang behind the main one, or, perhaps, surrounding the victim, dragging it down to join them. Of course, as Gamma grew, the energy from a single Warforged would go less and less far, spread between all those bodies. Eventually, it had to become more sedentary, cramming most of those bodies in a room to save energy. Then it was more than a room. Over time, the number of Warforged in nearby areas dropped, making it less and less likely to find more of them that it could lure in. Gamma could move on and subsist, but only barely, and it didn't really do much. Conserving energy and staying alive was essentially all that it did. Just stay alive to stay alive. When the other Dark Ancients found it, they must have helped it, essentially feeding Gamma Warforged to keep it alive and growing. But why? Empathy would seem out of character. And more than that, with the Atarans gone and the creation forges shut down, Warforged, the only practical source of life extension for these body-hopping parasites, became a limited resource. As much as someone, maybe multiple parties, had put a lot of new Warforged into suspended animation, preserving their food source for the future, you would think cold, probably psychotic beings who intend to live forever would think long-term, and even if it took 2,000 or 3,000 years, eventually all the Warforged ever built would have died or been consumed. Were they gambling that other races would eventually create compatible living constructs? Or did they see Gamma's unique form of Dark Ancientness as sufficiently valuable to spend such a precious, finite resource keeping it alive? As always, we're left with more questions. And Warsaw, still Warsaw, asked, are there any non-spoiler things you can tell us about ley lines in your world, and if they can be used on a mechanical level? Well, these ley lines don't necessarily have a direct, straightforward gameplay effect, though presumably casting fire-based spells near a volcanic ley line would confer some small benefit, a bonus to caster level or something. The interesting thing is that TR4, or his head anyway, didn't call them ley lines, he called them volcanic ley lines. It makes you wonder if there are other kinds. There are 3 planes of existence, all full of weirdness and wonders. That's a lot of room for stuff. I want to give a big thanks to all my generous Patreon patrons who got to watch this video early and had the chance to give feedback on any topics I might have missed, so I might include them in the final video. There's certainly room for more of your questions. And if you can't afford to contribute financially or just don't feel like it, remember it doesn't cost you a dime to like and share Tales from My D&D campaign. Plus, check out our D&D 5e livestream, Sunday Morning Heroes. Plus, we're starting up Anime Indecision again with Orestri and I doing solo reviews, starting with my review of One Punch Man.